So before we can jump into all the details and great things about communication, let's first try to define communication. There are over 100 definitions of communication, and many scholars don't necessarily agree what is and what is not communication. So the purpose of this video is not to convince you that what communication is and what communication isn't. It's more to get you to think, to form your own opinions about what is and what is not communication. So first, like I said, there are over 100 definitions. For this course, we'll use the definition of the simultaneous sharing and creating meaning through human symbolic interaction. So if we break that down a little bit, the first word that pops up is simultaneous, meaning communication is really a two-way street, that I am sending a message and also receiving a message at the same time. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the next video when we talk about the transactional communication process. Creating meaning. So in communication, we create meaning. This is how we make sense of our world. We are interacting with other people. We're interacting with other things. We're interacting with ourselves and creating meaning about the world around us. Through human symbolic interaction. Note the key word there, human, meaning we're not talking about communicating with our table or even our computer or animals. For this class, we're focusing on human communication. Symbolic interaction. Communication is symbolic. What that means is that meanings lie in people and not words. The words that we use, the nonverbal communication that we use, is all symbolic. We decide what the meanings are. And it's kind of fascinating if you think about it. That's why it varies so much from culture to culture, the different meanings that different body movements may have, or eye contact may have in a particular culture. It's decided by that culture. The words that we use, the meanings of the words are decided by people. So communication is very symbolic. If you don't understand what the symbols mean, there's no meaning at all. Another debate is, do you have to have a receiver to communicate? A lot of people will be willing to argue that communication with yourself is a form of communication. Maybe you're your own receiver. But if you think about the quote, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? So if I'm out there and I'm just yelling to myself and no one's around to hear it, no one's around to even perceive it, am I actually communicating? Or do I have to have a receiver? Does there have to be somebody to take that message and understand it and process it and receive it in order for me to be communicating? That's up for you to decide. Some scholars would say yes, some would say no. What about intention? Do you have to intend to communicate with someone? If I yawn and I don't realize that I'm yawning and I send a message and you receive that message of me yawning, but I didn't intend to send that message, is that still communication, or does communication have to be intentional? Which leads you to the question, is everything we do communication? Is there anything that's not communication? You're going to find some scholars that argue that everything we do is in some way communication. Everything. Even just sitting still communicates something to someone. So we cannot not communicate. Do you agree? Disagree? Also, phatic communion or scripted communication. This means your everyday encounters like, hi, how are you? Good, how are you? It's very scripted. If I say to you, hi, how are you? And you respond back, I'm terrible. That makes us feel very awkward because that's not following the social script. So is that really communication? We're not really creating meaning. There's not really any information exchange. It's just a scripted event. It does serve a purpose. It serves a purpose of perhaps relational maintenance. I acknowledge that that person exists. But again, I'm not really exchanging any information or creating any meaning. So is that actually communication or not? Some would argue yes. Some would argue no. Communication has two elements, really. Each message has a content dimension and a relational dimension. The content dimension is exactly what is said. If I say, take out the garbage, the content dimension is the words, take out the garbage. The relational dimension, though, says something about the relationship. If I say that in a very commanding tone, take out the garbage, that's suggesting something about our relationship. It's suggesting to you that maybe I'm in charge. I'm commanding you. I perceive that I have power over you in some form. That's the relational dimension. Every message has this relational dimension of the message. And finding that can sometimes be a little bit difficult because sometimes it can just be very subtle of just relational maintenance. But every message says something other than what the words that are said. Some specific types of communication. In general, we define intrapersonal communication as communication with yourself. Again, it's debatable. Some scholars will argue, yes, that is communication. Some will argue, no, it's not, because you can't be your own receiver. Interpersonal communication is generally defined as two individuals, or dyadic communication, you may see it as that. Small group communication is anywhere from 3 to maybe 20. I would probably argue with small group, maybe when you get over 10 individuals, there's not a lot of room for everyone to talk to each other. But 3 to 20 is kind of the general consensus on that. When you get into public communication, you're talking about one to many. So that's like when you're giving a speech in front of an audience, that's one to many, even though it's still two-way communication. Giving a speech with you up in the podium and an audience with you is not just one-way communication. It's not just you talking to the audience. You're talking with the audience. So keep that in mind as you give your speeches. And then there's also mass communication, where you send out a message to millions of people through like TV, through a medium, something like that. That's out of the realm of this class. So that's a brief overview about what is and what is not communication.